Now, let's look at how the heart works. Okay, how does the heart work? Now, when the heart relaxes, when the heart muscles relaxes, blood enter the heart. Okay, so the heart fills up during relaxation. During contraction, the heart empties. Now, so you have relaxation, contraction, relaxation, contraction. So you have a rhythm. And this rhythm of relaxation and contraction of heart muscles actually occurs in a cycle, and it's called the cardiac cycle, right? And the cardiac cycle has two phases. There are two phases of the cardiac cycle. You have the diastole phase and you have the systole phase, right? Diastole, systole. Now, there are different events that occur during diastole.
Sorry, repeat the whatever I just said it,
Look at
please.
look at them on top here. There are two phases of the cardiac cycle. Okay, these are diastole and systole. Okay, now there are specific events that occur during both phases of the cardiac cycle. So during diastole, the atria or the two atrium, they would relax along with the two ventricles. So both atria and ventricles would be relaxed during diastole. Okay, and as a result, remember I stated when the heart relaxes, it fills up. So when the atria and ventricles relax, blood from the body and lungs would flow back into the atria. So blood from the rest of the body cells would flow into the right atrium, and blood from the lungs would flow into the left atrium during diastole. Okay. Now, the valve between the atria and the ventricles, remember they are called the atrioventricular valves. These valves would be open at this stage. So as blood is flowing into the atria, it would be carried into the ventricles. So the ventricles could fill up. Okay? So blood from the atria flows into the ventricles also during diastole. Because remember, not only the atria that is relaxed, the ventricles are also relaxed. So both atria and ventricles would be filled during diastole. Now, as the ventricles fill up, pressure begins to increase. And as pressure increases inside the ventricles, the atrioventricular valves need to close, right? These are the bicuspid valve and the tricuspid valve. They need to close to prevent the backflow of blood into the atria. Okay? So these three things happen during diastole. Now, during systole, you have two types of systole. Okay? You have two types of systole. You have atrial systole and you have ventricular systole. Now, during atrial systole, both atria contract, okay, forcing more blood into the ventricles. Yeah.
And you'll be posting the same class on Edmodo.
Yeah, I will be posting it on Edmodo.
Okay.
All right. So during atrial systole, both atria would contract. So the left atrium and the right atrium, both of them would be contracted. Okay, or they would contract during atrial systole. And when they contract, they would squeeze whatever excess blood remain in the atria into the ventricle. So all the blood in the atria would get into the ventricle, okay, because of that forceful contraction. Now, there is also what they call ventricular systole. During ventricular systole, both ventricles would then contract at the same time. and they would force blood out of the ventricles, out of the heart. So when during ventricular systole, when the left ventricle contracts, blood would be forced out of the heart through the aorta, right? From the left side of the heart through the aorta to the rest of the body. When the right ventricles contract during ventricular systole, the blood would leave the right ventricle and enter the pulmonary artery. That's deoxygenated blood entering the pulmonary artery and go to the lungs. Okay, good. Now the right ventricle pumps blood. Remember that the right ventricle pumps blood into the pulmonary artery, and this blood goes to the lungs. The left ventricle pumps blood into the aorta to be carried to the rest of the body. Okay. Now, when the ventricles relax, right? So after the blood is pumped from the ventricles, remember the ventricles cannot contract forever. At some point, it must relax. So when it relaxes after contraction, then the semilunar valves would close, because when the ventricle relax, if the semilunar valves do not close, then the blood in the aorta and the pulmonary artery would flow back into the ventricles, and you do not want that to happen. Okay, so let me go back to a previous diagram to show you exactly what I'm talking about. So look at this diagram here. This is the left ventricle here. Notice the wall is thicker. This is the right ventricle. The wall is thinner. So when the ventricles contract, when these two ventricles contract, okay, this valve here, let me get the pen. This valve here, that's a tricuspid valve because it's on the right side of the heart. Okay, it must close to prevent blood from flowing back into the right atrium. When the left ventricle contract, okay, let me use a different color. When the left ventricle contract, this valve here, the bicuspid valve or the mitral valve, must close to prevent blood from flowing back into the left atrium. Okay. Meanwhile, the right pulmonary, sorry, the right aortic, pulmonary, the right pulmonary semilunar valve must open, right? Because the right side of the heart is contracting, the right ventricle is contracting. So the valve at the base of the pulmonary artery must open, okay? And this would cause blood to flow from the right ventricle into the pulmonary artery, okay? From the right ventricle into the pulmonary artery. So that valve here opens. The pulmonary valve only opens when the right ventricle contracts. Okay? That's the only time the pulmonary valve would open, when the right ventricle contracts. When the right ventricle relax, the pulmonary valve would close and the tricuspid valve would open. All right? When the left ventricle contracts, the bicuspid valve would close and the aortic semilunar valve would open, because blood needs to get out of the left ventricle into the aorta during that contraction, right? Systole. Okay. Now, when the left ventricle relaxes, the bicuspid valve or the mitral valve would be open, and the aortic semilunar valve would close. Okay. So it follows that during systole, the atrioventricular valves close and the semilunar valves open. I'll repeat that. During systole, the atrioventricular valves close and the semilunar valves open. During diastole, the semilunar valves open, the two semilunar valves open, and the atrioventricular valve close. Okay? Because when contraction is happening, you do not want the atrioventricular valves to open, because if that happens, blood would flow back into the atria, and you do not want that to happen. You want blood to flow out of the heart. Okay? Good. Right. So remember the steps or the processes or the things that happen during diastole and the systole. Now here is a diagrammatic representation. Here you have atrial systole. Notice the tricuspid valve here on the right is open. The bicuspid valve on the left is open. Notice the semilunar valves are closed. So during systole, right, during atrial systole, the atrioventricular valves open and the semilunar valves close during atrial systole. During ventricular systole, the atrioventricular valve close and the semilunar valve open because the ventricles are contracting. Okay? During diastole, the atrioventricular valves open and the semilunar valves close. So the semilunar valves are closed during diastole and during atrial systole. Okay, these are the two times when the semilunar valves would close. The semilunar valves only open during ventricular systole because that is when the ventricles are contracting. Okay. The atrioventricular valves open during atrial systole and during diastole. All right. Okay. So this is how the heart pumps blood, right? It pumps blood in a cycle. You call the cycle the cardiac cycle. And there are two phases of the cardiac cycle. They are called systole and diastole. There are two types of systole. You have atrial systole and ventricular systole. Atrial systole is when the atria contracts. Ventricular systole is when the ventricles contract. Diastole is when all the ventricles and the atria, all of them or both of them would relax. Okay. Now let's look at the heartbeat. Now, how the human heart works, how is a heartbeat generated? So a heartbeat is generated when the valves of the heart open, not open, but when the valves of the heart closes. Okay, so there is what you call a lub-dub sound. Let me just write that. Okay, lub-dub. So when the atrioventricular valves, I'll just put atrioventricular valves. When these valves close, you get a lub sound, L-U-B. Okay, when the atrioventricular valves close, it makes a lub, L-U-B sound. Okay, when the semilunar valves, close, you get a dub sound. So the heartbeat goes lub dub lub dub lub dub. Okay. So lub when the atrioventricular valves close, dub when the semilunar valves close. Okay, and that's the heartbeat. So the heartbeat is it has to do with a two-tone song that is produced by the opening and closing of the heart valves. Okay, and you measure someone's heartbeat using an instrument called a stethoscope. Okay, so the stethoscope would help a medical doctor, know a patient's heartbeat. Now, in a healthy adult, the heartbeats at average 70 times per minute, or 70 beats per minute. But it will range, the range is actually from 60 to 80 beats per minute, but the average is 70, okay, beats per minute. Very similar to the pulse. Now, the beating of the heart is controlled by a group of special cells in the right atrium known as the pacemaker. Okay, there is another name for the pacemaker. It's actually a node. Let me use a different color. It's called the sinoatrial node. Okay, sinoatrial. Please forgive my handwriting. The sinoatrial node, or the SN. Okay.
Is it R or N?
SN. SINOATRAL. IAL. So sinoatrial node.
Okay.
Right? That's a pacemaker. It's a group of nerve cells in the right atrium that generates the heartbeat. Now, in some persons, this pacemaker becomes faulty. It malfunctions, and the person has to undergo surgery to put an electronic pacemaker. Right? That's what is referred to when persons say they have to put a clock in the heart. It's actually an electronic pacemaker they have to put there to help generate the heartbeat. Okay, it must be inserted surgically, right? That is if the natural one is malfunction, right? So if this pacemaker is malfunction, then the heart would beat too slowly, right? And when it beats too slowly, then the cells of the body wouldn't get blood as efficiently as they should. Okay? So remember that the sinoatrial node. Good? Now I have some homework for you guys. So I want you to explain the concept, or explain what is meant by a double circulation in animals. You're getting 3 marks for that. Then I want you to state the function of each of the following blood vessels, right? The jugular vein, the carotid artery, pulmonary artery, inferior vena cava, right? All these blood vessels here, I want you to state the function of them for 7 marks. And then I want you to outline the pathway or the route taken by an oxygen molecule from the lungs to the liver. Okay? Outline the pathway taken by an oxygen molecule from the lungs to the liver for 5 marks. So the number of marks should give you an idea as to how much you have to write. Good, so that's your home assignment for today. Any questions? Or anything you want me to go back and explain? I guess not. Okay. Right. So
So
I
I didn't finish taking down the home assignments.
didn't hear that.
I didn't take down the home assignments.
Oh, I actually send the PowerPoint presentation to you all so you would see it. Well, not the PowerPoint presentation. I send it as a PDF document. So check your email. Check your
Okay.
email. The email I sent you all for on Tuesday, I think it was Tuesday night, with the link for the first meeting we had Wednesday. The notes is in that same email. So you would find the homework at the end of that document.